People like games.
What's up, people? It's Solo, and after quite a long time, welcome back to a new episode of Story Mode. For today's episode, I'll be sharing with you the history behind the making of the Marvel vs. Capcom series. The episode is going to be broken up into two chapters. The first will focus on the birth of the Marvel and Capcom partnership in the 90s and how their early titles helped establish the visual identity and gameplay mechanics that would define the series. The second part will focus on the official birth of the Marvel vs. Capcom series and how the relatively small in scale first game led to the magnum opus of the series in Marvel vs. Capcom 2 in 2000, which one of my personal favorite games of all time, but then how a 13-year delay before a new entry in the series would be radically changed by Disney's purchase of Marvel, and then to wrap things up, more or less where the series stands now. So without doing much further, it's people like games, like, subscribe, etc., and let's get into it. Rather than start with Marvel vs. Capcom itself, I'm going to instead take a step back and go to the beginning of the Marvel and Capcom partnership. The first Marvel licensed game to be made by Capcom was The Punisher in 1993, an arcade side-scroll beat-em-up that wasn't particularly notable, but it did establish a partnership between the two companies that would see a whole lot of games come out over the next 20 plus years. The next of those would be released the following year in 1994, and that game was X-Men Children of Atom, Capcom's first Marvel-based fighting game. It came out at the same time as the animated series was airing on Fox and sort of hoped to take advantage of that popularity. It also featured the first ever Capcom character, with Akuma being a secret character that was unlockable in the game. But as you can see, it set the basis of the art style and combat style that would evolve with subsequent iterations, but that would form the basis of the Capcom and Marvel series. We then go again to the following year in 1995, which saw the release of Marvel Superheroes. It included the same sort of roster of X-Men characters, but expanded the scope to include a whole bunch of new Marvel characters, including Spider-Man, Hulk, Captain America, and crowd favorite, Shumagorath. Now we go to, again, the following year to 1996, because these dudes were cranking them out at a pretty yearly basis at the time period. This saw the release of X-Men vs. Street Fighter, and this was actually the first title in the Versus series. It featured 8 X-Men characters and 9 Street Fighter ones. The art style of the X-Men characters retained the artistic style of the animated series, which happened to sort of marry perfectly alongside the Capcom arcade style. And this game was notable because it introduced the tag team battle system, which is actually the true tag team beginning of the Versus series. We then jump one more year to again 1997, which saw the release of Marvel vs. Street Fighter. Basically the same exact game as previous years, but it featured a more expanded roster again of Marvel characters. It also was a bit less celebrated in the series because the creators had sought to tone down a bit of the craziness in the combat and ended up learning that was maybe not what people wanted. This game is notable in the series because it introduced the character assist mechanism, but the true scale of the series would start being reached a year later, again, when the next title in the series would expand the scale of the game. The original Marvel vs. Capcom Clash of Superheroes was released for the arcades in 1998. It again featured characters from both the Marvel and Capcom universes, including Spider-Man, Wolverine, Iron Man, Ryu, etc. The gameplay, again, was similar to the other fighting games in the series because, as I had mentioned on the top of this, the series was sort of the result of iterative developments that sort of saw little mechanics keep being improved upon. And so, although this game is sort of unique in its own right, it was sort of a culmination of those small iterative developments. It was the next game in the series that really saw a leap in what was being presented. It was one of the best games to be released for the Sega Dreamcast and one of my own personal favorite in the series and ever. The game was also the result of a 2-year development cycle instead of the yearly release and sort of took advantage of all those elements to create what is arguably considered the best fighting game of all time. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 New Age of Heroes was released in 2000. It was the first game in the series to be released on the Sega Dreamcast. The game featured a larger roster of characters from both the Marvel and Capcom universes, including Hulk, Venom, and Mega Man. The game's graphics were updated to take advantage of that Dreamcast hardware, and it also introduced new gameplay mechanics such as the ability to perform air combos and the snapback mechanic, which allow players to switch out their characters mid-combo. This game also introduced 3-player tag team, but instead of an assist character, you can call in one of your own teammates as an assist. But you couldn't spam it because if that character got hit when they popped out, the resulting damage would be affected when they would come out later on in the game. This featured almost 56 playable characters and almost every single one from previous iterations of the game, sort of like Smash Brothers Ultimate before Ultimate came out to exist. The music featured a weirdly placed smooth jazz that was perfectly sort of not supposed to work, but fit perfectly right alongside having 3D backgrounds for the 2D character sprites. Again, not enough to say one of the best games to be ever released, but this generational title wasn't followed up by an immediate successor. The relationship between Marvel and Capcom ended as the latter lost their license to make games, and another game in the Versus series wouldn't be heard of until 2011 with the arrival of Marvel vs. Capcom 3: Fate of Two Worlds. It featured new updated graphics and a roster of over 30 characters, but this time it was in 3D and didn't really capture the spirit of the game from 2000 that had become legendary at this point. A sequel again wouldn't follow for the years to come. This was because Capcom again lost the Marvel license to continue making the game since Disney decided it wanted to bring its game development in-house, which was until 2016 when they realized this might actually be a bad idea and hit up Capcom and were like, "Yep, let's run it back." And thusly, in 2017, Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite was released. It was a particularly bland game compared to its predecessor, which utilized cel shading to have a unique visual 3D take. Not only was the visuals changed, but the gameplay moved away from its 3v3 style and back to a 2v2 gameplay. And even more, the roster was entirely changed to remove a lot of the X-Men because Marvel wanted characters that were more in line with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Thus, Wolverine and Magneto became Gamora and the Winter Soldier. Anyway, that is basically the sum of the series as it stands now. If the way the previous title was developed is any indicator, that means we shouldn't be expecting a new title in the series anytime soon. Likely, they'll stick with the formula of keeping characters tied to the MCU, but as that film world starts bringing in X-Men and Fantastic Four characters, maybe we will see another one. Hopefully, it is in 2D as well instead of 3D because it just feels like a better fighting type game. But that's just a personal opinion. I'm sure that differs. But until then, we have the memories of one of the greatest fighting games ever made and the chance to have lived through it. And now you know a little bit of the story behind not only the evolution of the entire series, but of the choices that went into making them. But there you have it. The history of the Marvel vs. Capcom series. I hope you enjoyed. I thought it was pretty good for the most part, minus me being a little rusty. I'm Solo. It's People Like Games. Like, subscribe, etc. Peace.